Let's talk about Ulez. That got rolled out this week. It's Ulez week, by the way, and people are up in arms. We know now that the data that Khan's been using doesn't support the expansion of Ulez. People are rebelling. We're seeing cameras being damaged with paint, being torn down, being covered up. Is it time to scrap it, Neil?
Yeah, it should never have been imposed in the first place. It seems to me that what it lacks is any sense of proportion. We know from the Imperial College study that you just mentioned that the improvement in air quality that's supposed to come from this is about 3%. So it's neither here nor there, really. And yet the costs that are imposed upon people who are ill-fitted to meet them, white van man, elderly people who can't afford to change their vehicles, etc., is going to be enormous. It's always the people at the bottom of the income heap who seem to suffer the most from these green-zealot ideas. And if this had been introduced over a long period of time with moderate charges to begin with, I don't think people would necessarily have objected. But £12.50 a day is clearly ridiculous. If you're on a pension and you can't afford to change your car and you need your car because you may be disabled or whatever, or have some disability.
Stephen, it's a fair point. £12.50 for a pensioner per day is a lot of money. Dick Turpin wore a mask on the highways when he was robbing people. Is Mayor Khan right?
Well, hang on a second. When the Conservatives introduced Ulez and when Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport, wanted to expand its way out of London, the idea that the Mayor of London was actually the secondary figure here. It was being pushed by the then Conservative Mayor. But look, there's a couple of problems here.
About today, Stephen.
Yeah, talk about today. We're talking about Shirley Rodriguez, the Deputy Mayor of London, who actually queried and tried to get the professor from Mile End College to actually recalibrate the data that they had. And I think there's a real problem here with the actual data about how efficacious it really, really is. I think Ulez in central London makes a lot of sense. I think Ulez in outer London, in Bromley, Bexley, Hillingdon, Ealing, I'm not convinced by it. And I think that the rollout has been far too quick and it hasn't been done with the people. It's not been done with the grain of the people. It's been done against the grain. And that's the problem. And we saw that in the by-election.
For me, as somebody who works in London and travels to London on a weekly basis, is the underground, the fumes that come out the underground. Why isn't Khan tackling that?
Well, he is. I mean, if he was sat here, he'd give you chapter and verse about all the filtration systems that they've introduced, particularly they've introduced it on the Elizabeth line, on the Jubilee line, and they're rolling it through the rest of the system. But the problem is we do have, you're admitting, Lee, that we do have an air pollution problem in the city, in London. And I think everybody accepts that now. And it's not just, the individual cases that we know about. But the question is, what do we do about it? But what really gets my goat about this is that if you're rich...
My question, is £12.50 a lot of money for old age pensioners?
Of course it is, but if you're a toff and you can afford to pay £12.50... Well, hang on a second. No, Lee, here's the problem. If you're that rich, you can actually drive in and out of London in your Roller or your Bentley. Yeah, exactly, but the point is, what is it doing about air quality control? If you're going to say that if you're rich enough, you can pollute the atmosphere, how does that make the case for clean air?
3%,
it beats me.
3%.
So Khan actually said this week that the pollution in London was damaging children's lungs.
Rubbish.
Now, do we expect a whole wave of families now coming forward to sue the mayor for damaging their children's lungs?
Well, I don't see how you could sue an individual for that. I mean,
or an organisation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not even sure what organisation you could actually sue for that. But the reality is to actually prove the causal linkage between that and somebody's lungs being damaged would be very, very difficult because it's in the generality.
But he's using that as an excuse to expand.
He's talking about thousands of people in London, and the data there is incontrovertible. The data as to what the cause is controversial.
But we're not talking about pea super fogs here, are we?
No,
we're not going back as we had when every house in London burnt coal back in the early 1950s. When people talk about air pollution, we're talking about minute quantities, and making a minute change in a minute number at vast cost seems to me to be wholly disproportionate. So yes, we all want clean air.